How's it going, everyone? My name is Dylan Abernathy, and I'm a junior model artist living in Toronto, Canada, and thank you so much for taking the time to come check out my tutorial on how to create complex props for video games. So I've been in the industry for just over a year now, and as someone who's still trying to learn everything and wrap their head around this sort of crazy world of 3D art, I know how difficult it can be to sort of sit down and try and find all the information in one place. I've been using the community and a bunch of different discords and resources online for, years now to try and better my skills and all this stuff, and I still haven't come across a place where I sort of found all the information on how to create some of these props in one location. So what I wanted to do to sort of give back to the community here and help out some more beginner to mid-level artists is take all the information I have on props and sort of my approach to things and try and make the most digestible, easy to follow, easy to sort of dive in tutorial that I possibly could. And I put it out there so that the community can sort of take it, do what they want with it, and learn however they can. Through sort of an example of mine here. So what are we going to be making in this tutorial? Chances are, if you've come across this, you probably know what it is, and that is going to be the typewriter. So this is an interesting thing. I decided to go with a typewriter for this is because if we look at this guy, it is a pretty complex piece, and well, the title of the course is Creating Complex Props for Games, as you can see. What I wanted to do is try and find a prop that not only is visually interesting, but something that I knew was going to be very, very challenging. Looking at this guy, we have all these complex shapes. It's some curvy, hard surface engineering. We have all these gears, all these sort of random metallic bits sticking out, a bunch of stuff that, at first glance, it's even hard to see exactly what's going on. And typically, if I'm working on a game or I'm working on an environment and something like this has to be put in there, the easiest thing to do would be, go for something like this, right? The sides are covered. There's a big, thick border around things. There really isn't anything too complex, but it still sells the idea of this being a typewriter. But what I wanted to do with this course is say, what do you do when you sort of want to tackle something head on? You don't really know how to approach it. You don't really know where to start. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing here. And as a matter of fact, that is exactly what we have done. So I'm actually recording this very first part after the tutorial is done, and I have to say, even though there's always room for improvement and always room for critiques, I would say this has been a pretty big success. The quality that we have come out of this with has been pretty spot on. I'm still doing the renderers now, so this is kind of all we have at the moment. But all in all, I'm pretty happy with how this project has turned out. So let's go take a look at how exactly we got there. So this is the drive. If you are watching this, chances are you've probably stumbled across this and are watching it right here. I kind of wanted to make this tutorial so that anyone, no matter what they're trying to learn in this pipeline, can sort of approach it however they want. If you're an absolute beginner, you can just sort of skim through this, and I think it's super valuable to sort of understand each part of the pipeline. I never expect anybody to watch this entire course. There is way too many parts. It is way too long. Don't do that to yourself. But if you really want to learn one skill, dive into that chapter, and I've designed it in such a way that, say you just want to practice your high poly, you think that you just sort of need to brush up on that, you can dive into here, watch these parts, and grab the starting file. So if you literally just want to practice something, you can follow along with me with the files that start you exactly where the tutorial chapter starts. I think that was pretty important, so if you only want to learn one thing, you can do that, but if you also kind of want to follow everything, you can do that as well. I've also designed it in a way that we have all these individual chapters, and these are being recorded in real time, but say you just want to skim through things or you want to see how the thing is done pretty quickly and overall. At the start of each one of these long chapters, we sort of have the complete version of the chapter. And let's crank this guy up to HD. What this is, and this is like I said in every single one of the longer chapters, is just sort of a compilation of all the different parts. So on the bottom right here, we can see which part that we're viewing right now. And say we get to, or let's just start at the beginning. Let's say that we're a little bit curious as to what I'm doing right here. Why are these edges all purple? What's going on? I don't really know what this part of the pipeline is. I can say, oh, this is 04 High Poly 01. Here's the video for that. We can dive in. And I'm going to have it muted right now, but this is a real-time video where I'm actually explaining everything that we're doing. And if that's what you wanted to see and that's how you wanted to learn this, you can do exactly that. And grab those files and follow along. So like I said, I wanted this to be approachable for pretty much anybody, anyone who wants to sort of watch things a bit faster, watch things kind of at its own pace. I've spent a lot of time watching tutorials, and some of you might have sniped this guy here. This radio is actually, if we go ahead and open this up, part of another tutorial, probably my favorite tutorial that I've watched. This is the military radio by Simon Futch. So this is a super popular tutorial. You've probably seen a million of these guys floating around on ArtStation. On the other hand, though, we have a lot of tutorials on the internet where you buy them, you spend $5, $10, $20, and it's someone talking over, footage that's sped up 500% or something like that. I haven't really come across anything that gives you the option to sort of choose which one you'd prefer, and that's why I wanted to design a course kind of around that philosophy. And in doing so, I want to make this as digestible and easy to follow as possible. But other than that, the rest of this stuff is pretty standard. One thing I do want to include before I sort of wrap this up is this is the very first chapter, and as you can see, it says Introduction and Demo. One of the things I think that's super, super important before going into any tutorial is having a pretty strong grasp of how exactly the person teaching goes about their workflow. So what I decided to do to sort of kick things off is record a video where I go through my entire workflow that I'm going to be using on the typewriter, but on a very small prop like this guy. And I think I knock it out in about 30-ish minutes, somewhere around there. It's going to be in this video right now, so just keep watching and we'll be getting to that. But I want to sort of expose you guys to my entire workflow. I'm going to have all my plugins installed and be using them. I obviously don't expect anyone to be following along with this part, but I think it's pretty important so that going into the rest of the tutorial, you know exactly why I'm setting things up in certain ways, how I'm going about things, and why, or exactly how I'm thinking about the next steps as we sort of go through this. If you watch this part, you're going to have a much better understanding of why I'm setting up my models in certain ways, why I'm starting with a mid-poly, for example, why I'm setting up my hard edges in certain ways before bringing things into ZBrush, and how exactly I'm going to go about baking. So that pipeline I just kind of went over really quickly there is actually one that I sort of stumbled across while watching a tutorial by Simon Futch. It's actually the radio that we just went over a few minutes ago. So what I've done is, if you're more curious about that workflow and you want a bigger breakdown and more discussion on some of the plugins and sort of how all of that came to be, I'd highly recommend that you check out what's linked in the second chapter. I'm going to be linking that tutorial as well. Go ahead, go check that out. For me, it was an absolute game changer, and a lot of this work honestly wouldn't have really came out the way it was if I didn't go watch that tutorial. It has completely reworked my entire pipeline, and honestly can't thank the guy enough. So just wanted to mention that before diving into the demo itself. Gotta give credit where credit is due.
So the first thing is just bringing in a cube. I'm going to be scaling this up a little bit. Let's just get it to a nice uniform like 125. And I'm going to assume that you know a very basic level of navigation and in certain hotkeys like F to get things in frame, what the channel box and layer editor is, and the modeling toolkit. Everything else I'll be going over, but just a very, very basic knowledge. Hopefully you guys know. If not, I'm going to try my best to sort of go and explain through everything anyways. So I'm just hitting this box here to get wireframe on, just so that I have a bit of a clearer view with what I'm doing here. R to scale, of course. I'm going to scale this guy down, and really I'm not too concerned with the measurements because I'm just trying to get the shape, and this is a very, very simple shape. So more or less, like I'm not too concerned with getting this exact. I'm going to go into edge mode and hit Control B to bevel these guys and just sort of get this look here. That's more or less what we're going for. Let's see. Now we've got to put a cut in here. So Control Shift X to get into our cut tool. I'm going to switch views here by pressing spacebar, and Shift F is to get everything in view. If I actually have the object selected and I hit Shift F, as you can see, everything just gets into view, and we're trying to get this side view. Once again, Control Shift X to get our cutting tool. And I'm just going to hold Shift and slice this down. For this specific part, I'd encourage you guys to just sort of watch along rather than follow along. Just so that, because like this isn't really something that you want to show off to anyone. It's just a learning exercise for us right now. So feel free to sit back and just see what I'm doing more or less. But yeah, I'm just going to reposition this a little bit. Extrude this out by holding Shift and dragging. We're going to get that nice little end piece. And then we want this guy sticking out of the side here. So Control E, I'm just going to offset it, scale it appropriately to what we're going for. It's more about in this position, and shift drag or shift click to pull that guy out. So that's more or less the shape that we're going for. This is where we're going to start to go into some new tools that you guys may or may not have. I'm going to be opening up the Bool DC Bool Manager. Now this is a plugin free to use. Like I said, I'm going to be going over how to install all of this later. But this is a very, very good Boolean toolkit if you are a Maya user. So we're going to be using this toolkit to get these holes in here. So simply what I'm going to do, create polygon primitives cylinder. Let's scale this guy up a bit. Sure, since these are all going to be cut in, I'm not too concerned, especially for this demo, I'm not too concerned with the amount of subdivisions. Like 20 is fine. So what I'm going to do is just scale this guy down, just position him a little bit, get him in there. For this guy, so all these small ones here, what I want to do essentially is have screws like inside of them, just so I can show you some cool baking and texturing techniques. But for this big one, I'm going to have actually put in as geo, so we're going to get to that later. So I'm going to duplicate this guy, hitting Control D and leaving him over here for now. Control D once again to get this over here. I'm holding J to get it to snap when I'm rotating. It's a cool trick there. And I'm holding X when I'm moving this guy to snap its position based on the grid. So I can get it to be right in the middle of this guy. And then once again, holding X and going this way, I can get it to snap right in the middle. And we can cut a hole right about there. Control D, move him, holding J to rotate and snap, and X to get it directly in the middle. And you're going to see we're going to be repeating a lot of stuff over and over again. So boom, boom, boom. I'm not too worried about the bottom because, like I said, this is just for demonstration. And then once again, duplicate. And for this guy, to get him centered, what you can do is I'm just going to select this face, holding Shift and right click, we can go to poke face. And that's going to add a vertice right in the middle. And now holding V, we can snap based on where vertices are. And we can just snap it, move it into place. That's just a quick way to get things perfectly lined up. And then Control Delete to get rid of those. So now we have all these different cylinders that we can use for Booleans. I'm going to go to Mesh Combine. And now what we can do is let's just freeze transformations and delete history on everything. We're going to select our base, shift click our Booleans, make sure this is on difference, hit new Booleans. Excuse me. And as you can see, we're starting to get these Boolean cutouts. Now the cool thing about the DC Bool Manager is we can actually like adjust things as we're Booleaning them. So I can move this up and down and we can get real-time Booleans. Just for this demonstration, I'm pretty happy with how it is. And then we can just hit cleanup, delete history and base objects, and now we have our Boolean mesh. So super, super quick, really easy way to do that. All we have to do left is get this big, larger hole. And the reason I left this to be a separate one is because if we scale this up, what I want to do is select these faces on the bottom. I'm going to select one face and hit Shift period, and it's going to grow selection. So I can just deselect these guys, and we have this bottom face. Control E, offset it in a little bit, and then Shift click drag down. And now we get a bit more of an intricate Boolean when we put this guy in. Like so. So once again, start with our base, shift click to our Boolean mesh, new Boolean, delete history and base objects. So that's essentially the mesh that we're going for here. I'm pretty happy with it. I mean, it's as basic as it gets pretty much, but like for now it's good. So what we want to do is set up our smoothing group so that when we bring it into ZBrush, it knows where to add different polygroups, and that's really important so we know where our edges are, which is really important so that we know where to bevel things, and that's going to make a lot more sense in a second. So I have these auto smooth set up here. So if I go and smooth it by like 40 degrees and I turn off wireframe, you can see all these smooth areas are smooth like they're supposed to be, but then all these hard edges are hard like they're supposed to be. And that was done automatically. Like if I go and soften everything, it looks terrible, and I hit 40 again, it's going to know where to smooth things based on their angle and the transition from polygon to polygon, which is really helpful. And I can even press this guy here. It's going to show us where all of our hard edges are. So everything is smooth, but where the purple is. Purple is going to show us where our hard edges are, which is really useful because we are going to have to use another custom plugin to sort of set up our transition from Maya to ZBrush. And the cool thing about this is if I open up our UV editor, and this is of course going to get interesting on one screen, you see these are our UVs right now, but we want to sort of have like all of these areas here where it's like one smooth face and one smooth face pretty much. We want these to be their own shells, and we have a plugin that breaks this up based on where our hard edges are. It's this guy right here, and as you can see, everywhere we have a, where is it, UV shell. It is a group that is broken up by hard edges, and this is very important because we can bring this into ZBrush now, and it's going to know where to add polygroups, and where we know where our polygroups are, or where our polygroups are set up rather, we can add these sort of smooth edges with a polish. So now that this is all set up, and like I said, this is supposed to be going over pretty fast, but it's going to make more sense once we're done everything. So once we have this set up, I'm going to hit this arrow here, which is going to export it into a temporary file. I can bring up ZBrush. I can just get something in here just to start with. And if I hit obj in, boom, we immediately got our mesh from Maya to ZBrush, which is super cool. I want to hit Shift F, and it's going to show us our polygroups in our wireframe. And as you can see, everything is just one color right now. But if I hit auto groups with UVs, what it's going to do is based on our UV shells, it's going to assign polygroups. So this is starting to make a bit more sense visually now, right? Like you're starting to see why I wanted to do a quick demo of this so that you can see why it's going to set meshes up in very specific ways. So anywhere there was a UV shell, it's a different color. And this is really useful because based on these, we can say, okay, where two groups intersect, let's make that smoother. Let's bevel it. Let's give it a nice transition. Before we do that, of course, we're going to have to Dynamesh this and give it a bit more geometry. We're at 273 right now. This is not something we can sculpt with. If we start sculpting on this, like it just doesn't work, right? So I'm going to go over to Dynamesh. I'm going to hit Dynamesh. And as you can see, now this is something we can start to sculpt on. This is something that's usable. Dynamesh is like going to be your best friend throughout this whole thing. This is not enough geometry though for what we're doing. So I'm going to Control Z. Let's just turn up the resolution to about 384. We're just going to test this incrementally. And I'd say that's more than enough geometry. So Shift F is once again to turn on and off the wireframe. And I'm just going to move this guy down here for now. I'm going to be changing our material. Since this is a metal piece, we're going to want a metal matte cap. GW Worn Silver is a really good one. Once again, I'm going to show you guys how to install all this stuff, so don't worry if it's not already a part of your ZBrush. So with this setup currently, what we can now do, since everything is properly set up, is we can go to Polish by Features. And by making or checking this little circle, we can turn this up, and you can see, boom, all of these circular parts just went from like very, very chamfered to very, very soft, which is great. That's exactly what we want, right? Another thing that we can really quickly do is mask by features groups. And what this does is it's going to mask where our groups meet each other, like I mentioned before. And we can grow our mask, sharpen, grow it a bit more, sharpen. And if we invert our mask by control clicking outside of our geometry, we can then turn our polish settings on and get these very, very smooth transitions here. And there we go. Like that's our high poly mesh right there. Like we've essentially more or less made this shape super quickly with nice polished edges in a very high poly way in not a lot of time. Like I'm looking at my recording and this is 20 minutes in. And I'm pretty sure the first like 10 minutes I was just talking about like the course. So Of course, what you're going to want to do is then, let's say maybe like go to the trim dynamic brush, and you're going to want to beat up some corners. Like I'm just using a mouse right now, which we're not going to be doing later, but look, as you can see, like you're going to want to make some imperfections, of course, make it a bit more personal. For the sake of this, like that's all I'm going to be adding. And then we're going to want to bring this back into Maya. So how are we going to do that? Like this is currently almost 500,000 triangles. That's a bit too much. So how can we do that? How can we get it back into Maya and be, kind of usable and set up properly? The way I'm going to do that is by duplicating this and turning off the original. And once again, Shift F to see our wireframe, right? Like this is very, very dense. What we can do is go to Z Plugins, Decimation Master, and Pre-Process Current. So we have to do this before we decimate anything. As you can see at the top, it's loading, and what it's doing is just sort of analyzing our mesh, more or less, seeing what's going on with it. And now once we have that sort of all analyzed, we can decimate it and make it drastically smaller in poly count. So I can say, okay, I want this to be like 5% of what it currently is poly count wise. Decimate current, and boom, like it has gone way down. Obviously, this kind of mesh is pretty much unusable in 99% of cases, but if we're just trying to use it for a high poly to bake down and we just want it to be something reasonable geo-wise that we can use in Maya, like if we look at it, it's visually the exact same, so we might as well use this as our high poly, which is exactly what I'm going to be doing. Let's bring this back into Maya by hitting OBJ out, letting that export. We're going to go back into Maya. I'm just going to double click this to turn off those hard edges. And I also have the outliner open over here, where I'm going to name this Metal Low, just so we can sort of keep things organized. I also like to use layers quite a bit, so I'm going to make a new layer and just call it Low. For low polys, I like to make things blue. And what this is cool for is that if we assign this by adding selected and we use our wireframe again, the wireframe is going to be blue. The wireframe is based on the color of the group. I cannot talk right now. I'm very sorry about that. So that's cool. So now let's get our other mesh in. We can start working on this a little bit more. And to do that, all we have to do is once again bring up our MOP multi-OBJ tools, which we exported our stuff with. Select this and import. And now, boom, we have our high poly directly on top. And that's the easiest way that I found at least to work between Maya and ZBrush. So now we can close out. We have this other mesh. I'm just going to call this Metal High. The underscore low and underscore high is actually really important when we set up our baking later. So as we go through the tutorial, I was showing you a bit more as to how to set that up. But it's just something to keep in mind as we move forward. Let's make a group for this so we can easily work with it. Just call it high. And I like to make it red so it's very easy to sort of see what we're working with. So boom, we can just turn it off. The only thing that we need to keep in mind with this guy is since we're baking it down, we just need to make sure that it's all smoothed out. So shift, right click, and just go to soften edges. You can also just go to mesh display, of course, harden, soften, or if you're me, just put it up here on a toolbar. I'm going to turn that off now because we're pretty much done with this guy. The low poly though, of course, there's a million different ways that we could optimize this to make it way better. Like this is pretty much like unacceptable geometry. Just a quick way to clean this up, I'm just going to drag these floating edges off a little bit. And then, as much as I wouldn't recommend this, well, first of all, I'm going to merge the vertices. As much as I wouldn't recommend this, I'm just going to simply, for the sake of this demonstration, hit Mesh Cleanup, and it's just going to automatically add those edges. This isn't perfect, but it's getting the job done. So like I said before, one thing I want to do is fill these holes with bolts. And that's specifically just for the bake, and it's just to make it look good. So for now, what I'm going to be doing is, oh, that's actually, I did that wrong. So since this is all going to be baked down, we actually don't need these holes anymore. So I'm going to be essentially filling these in, which is going to make it a lot easier for us in the long run. We're actually going to be adding the bolts to the high poly. So let's select all of these, delete the holes. because we can bake down a lot of information. Like all of that is going to be transferred directly onto the normal map information. So we really don't need to actually record any of that. So I think that's all of the holes. So I can shift right click and where is it? Fill hole and then control backspace. Yep. So I can hit shift right click again, fill hole, control delete to get rid of that. And we can just go around and do that for all of them. Okay, so before I go forward, I just sort of want to explain in a bit more detail why it is that I did that. And that's because this surface here, with the hole cut into it, with the hole cut inside of it, or any of these surfaces for that matter, with a hole cut into it and a screw sticking out, it will never affect the actual silhouette. And since it's never affecting the silhouette, what we can do is we can just sort of add that to the high poly and bake it down. Like with a screw in here, that's not going to change the actual shape of the mesh. It's just surface detail. So I decided to get rid of the geometry there. This here, technically we could bake, but since it's so much larger, we want that shadow information. We sort of want the lighting to play off of it a little bit more. So I opted, since it's like literally like a third of the mesh, to just sort of keep that in. You're gonna have to call the shots for some of this stuff, but for something like this, it just makes sense. And we already have a solid amount of geo cutting out. So I'm gonna leave this the way that it is. And then from here, we can just, like I said before, hit cleanup. It's not ideal, but it's definitely a lot better. I might even opt to manually do some of this stuff just for a chance at a better bake, just by connecting that stuff there. This is fine. This is all fine. Bottom. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that should be good for now. So what we want to do now is add our screws to our high poly. And what I do when I'm adding screws is I'm actually using a plugin. I will add a link to this. This is a paid plugin. But for those of you who opt to not pay for this, I will include some screws as meshes if you guys want to use those, or you can make your own. But I'm going to include a link to this tutorial, or a link to this plugin, a link to several tutorials on how to make screws, and then I'm also going to include meshes of screws that I made myself in case you just want to get those in there quickly. So the way that I use this is, it's really great. Like this is a quick way to add colors for an ID. There's just a quick way to get primitives in. Like I can just say cylinder facing what direction with however many sides. It's really good, but we're going to be using it for these screws that it comes with. I'm just going to use the first one here. It adds it to whatever face you have selected. And we could, of course, bring this into ZBrush, beat it up, add damage. Now, I would encourage that, like, usually, but for the sake of this, like, we really don't need to. I'm going to hit 3 so that it smooths it out, and then we can just sort of go to Modify, Convert, Smooth Mesh Preview to Polygons, and just soften those edges, and boom, there's a high poly screw ready to use. That's why I like this so much, because, like, with things like screws, like, I don't mind using pre-existing plugins for this stuff because it's something so basic, and if I wasn't modeling it in, I would just be using someone else's pre-existing texture anyways. So that's where I sort of say, okay, it's okay to do this. Of course, for more unique stuff, you're going to be modeling it all yourself, but just for the sake of this tutorial and getting a quick screw in here, boom, like we have a screw. That's going to be baked down. It's going to take no time at all. So I'm just going to duplicate this around. It's important to sort of rotate things and add these like imperfections. I'm just changing the rotation to world so that I can get a nice clean 90-degree rotation on the side. And I'm just going to manually plop these in. I believe we made all these holes the same size, so this should be pretty quick and easy. Once again, Control D to duplicate, E to get our rotation, and holding J to just snap it. We're just going to get this in, give it a random rotation, and then boom, we're going to get this guy over here. Okay, so this is pretty quick. But now I'm going to go over how exactly I'm setting up the bake for this. So we have this right here, metal underscore high. I'm going to name this metal underscore high 01. From here, I'm going to take all of our screws. I'm going to make them one mesh, freeze the history on that, and I'm going to essentially just clean this up a little bit first. I'm going to name this metal underscore high underscore 02. So why would I set it up this way? The reason I do this is because we have metal underscore low, which is going to be loaded into our baker as a low poly mesh. Metal underscore high 01 and metal underscore high 02 are also going to be both loaded into the baker as the high poly that's going with metal. The underscore high is going to say, okay, we're going to put this on the corresponding underscore low. And I've given it 01 and 02 because I can keep these separated in case I want to make some changes to them later, but they're still both going to be baking to metal underscore low. And this is really useful when we get a bunch of stuff in our scene that's really complex later and say we want to change things or swap them out. It's just much easier to keep them as separate meshes, but just by adding an underscore and a number, we can have them separated but still corresponding to the same low poly. So that is pretty much the geometry part of this setup. We're going to be adding colors now to this just so we can break it up for an ID mask later on. A quick way to do that is I'm going to make this green. Once again, I'm using this plugin, but if you want to make a color for yourself, I'll show you how to do that right now without this plugin, which all we would just do is hold right click. Whoa. I'm going to go on the bolts, hold right click, assign favorite material, Lambert. Just name it red because we're going to make it red. And just change the color to red. Like that plugin is just like a very nice like quality of life plugin. There we go. It's just a very nice quality of life plugin. That's why I sort of keep it around and use it. But like something like this you can do in 2 seconds without it. So the reason we broke this up is since these bolts essentially aren't going to have any geometry whatsoever on the low poly and we're baking it down into the normal map, we can make an ID mask as well so that we can essentially mask it out really, really quickly when we're texturing, even though there's no geometry that we're masking it onto specifically. So I'm going to leave this the way it is. It'll make more, like if you don't understand that, it's going to make a lot more sense once we get to the texturing and the baking. I'm going to make sure these are both on the high poly layer, close it, and now all we have to do is quickly UV this for the bake. So how do we UV this to make it set up properly for baking? Essentially all we have to do is anytime there's a 90-degree angle, we make it a hard edge and we cut the UV shell. Everything else is soft. So more or less it's already pretty much set up all right. I can just sort of go ahead and soften everything here, and then we can just sort of manually do this. So anytime there's a 90-degree turn, so a box, for example, is every single edge, we would go in and harden those edges. We can also trim around the top of here because we're following this face and it's cutting off at 90 degrees as we're going down. So I can trim across here, make that a hard edge. Trim around the bottom here. Hard edge. These are going to be soft because they are not a 90-degree transition, but once we get down here, these are 90-degree transitions. So we make those hard edges. And then all of these rings here. So I'm going to select these faces, holding control and right click. I can go to two edges, to edge perimeter, because we couldn't get that first ring very easily. And select all of these and hard edges. So essentially, yep, everything's soft except for where we have those 90-degree transitions. And that's exactly where we're also going to be cutting our UV edges. So we pretty much have them already set up from what we did before. So we have this top piece, these middle pieces, and And just for the sake of this, I do have a plugin that I really, really encourage you guys to use for UV mapping, which is the UV mapping toolkit right here. I'll have a link to this as well. It is paid for, so once we get to the actual UVing part, I'll be showing you guys how to do that with just the included stuff inside of Maya. But for now, in the sake of this, I'm just going to be quickly doing it with this toolkit involved. But like I said, I use this for literally everything. I super heavily encourage you guys to get it. So I'm selecting this. We've already broken everything up the way that we're supposed to. And just making sure I'm planering it all and having a nice sort of like having my polygroup set up really, really nicely. So since this whole section here is essentially, there's no 90-degree cuts, I'm going to be taking that, planering it, and just unfolding it by U, which is exactly what we want. So that's really nice. So it's interesting because essentially we could take this entire thing around and have it as one shell and just like add a cut in here, but that's not going to get us a good bake. It's just anytime there's a 90-degree cut, that's where we're cutting it. So right here, we are going to give it its own sort of shell right here as well. Gets its own shell. This back part, we already did that. So the bottom as well is going to obviously get its own shell. One of these guys is going to be flipped. This guy right here. Let's see, what else do we still have? This box on the side. So we can just planar both of these on Y. Planar both of these on X. And then this guy is on Z. Unfold those so they're facing the right way, and just make sure they're not on top of each other. For the bake, of course, they're going to have their own unique space. And I think that just leaves these rings here, which should be pretty quick. So I'm going to select these two rings and planar them by X. Give them a little bit of space here. Now we got to add a quick seam to them. So we're going to select these two edges, for example, shift right click, cut them, select the UVs, and I'm just going to unfold by U. Like I said, I have a way to do all this stuff without this, but it's just quicker. Like if I hold shift right click, we can unfold by U over here. So once I actually start going a bit more into the typewriter side of things, I'll be showing you guys how to do that. This is just for the quick demonstration. This top part, or these two parts here, we're going to planar by Y. And that should more or less be it. Just to be safe, I'm going to planar or unfold everything by U to make sure it's facing the right way. I'm going to make sure it's all the same textile density. And what we can do is another really important thing when baking is making just sure everything's straight. So everything's at a nice straight angle. Like we don't want anything that's kind of like this. Even if we do sort of have to force it to be straight, most of the time that's a good thing. Okay, and since everything's good, I'm just going to go to modify, layout, just lay it out like twice, and we're just going to move forward with whatever it spits out. So what this does is it essentially analyzes everything and automatically packs it in a very nice way for us, which is very, very useful. Once you get to much more complex things, it's a really nice tool to have. And we can say, like, based on our resolution, like how many pixels do we want for padding between like each UV shell, which is really nice. Usually doesn't take this long. I think it's because I'm recording and I have a bunch of stuff open that it's taking a bit longer. And then I also have this reference image blocking the progress bar. Okay, there we go. So yeah, this is obviously like a terrible use of UV space. In fact, I'm just going to manually change it a little bit just so that the bake has a better chance of turning out good on its first try. Because yeah, like, like it's obviously being bottlenecked by the fact that this thing here is so long and has to stay the same textile density. But if I just move this, I just want to give everything a little bit more breathing room. Which is kind of unnecessary, but it's fine. There we go. So we're going to be moving forward with these as our UVs. So I'm going to freeze transformations and history, and we can just sort of spit this out onto our desktop for the sake of this. So, excuse me. I'm just going to name this metal low. Like I said, the underscore low and high is important. And then these two guys together, I can have our high poly selected. We can go File, Export Selection, and just name it metal high. And boom. Now what we can do is go over to Toolbag, which we're going to be doing our baking in there. Its baker is kind of like no other baker out there, which makes it really, really nice and interactable. So interactable, yeah, I think that's a word. What we can do is we can essentially like paint on our bake and make sure there's no skewing. So I'm going to hit the little bread icon and hit the quick loader, hit load. And since our naming convention is set up properly, by selecting these two and hitting open, it'll automatically slot things into the correct spot. So high is our high underscore 01 and 02, and then low just has metal low. So this is what it looks like. It has our materials loaded in. I can even hit the H to not show our high poly. And I just want to get a preview of this. So I'm going to hit the P. It's going to say you don't have anywhere where you're saving stuff. So just for the sake of now, I'm going to put it on the desktop. I'm going to say metal test. Save. And it's going to essentially give us a preview of our normal bake. So there you go. We're getting these soft, smooth edges here. I'm going to change the lighting a little bit just because it's pretty terrible. Just so we get a better look at this. Obviously, that's not the point of this right now. But I'm also going to change the color or the background to a color, make it a lot darker, just so it's easier to see. But as you can see, we have this perfect bake where all of our edges are super smooth. These bolts are sort of put into place. This is really nice. As you can see, like if we baked this down, we wouldn't get the same sense of depth from the lighting. So that's where we're sort of calling the shots, like when do we not do that. Over here, we're getting a nice transition between things. The damage, of course, doesn't read super well at certain angles, but that's pretty natural. But yeah, so what we can do with this baker now is we can go to the low poly. It automatically makes cages for us, which is really nice. So as long as everything's inside of this cage, it's going to bake properly. But the most important thing is we have this paint offset. So if I go to show skew and paint offset, we can essentially paint where things kind of seem weird. Like you see how this bolt is kind of wonky and not straight? Like we can paint over top of it. And it's going to straighten it out a little bit. I think oh, I'm using the wrong thing, that's why. Let's see. Was I hitting paint offset? Okay, I meant to hit paint skew, my bad. So we can paint this, and it's going to straighten it all out. I think I messed it up though when I hit paint offset, so I'm going to clear that. And make sure our cage gives it enough room. Sorry about that. Yeah, so if we hit paint skew, we can sort of paint it and make it pop up straight like we want to. Like right here is a great example of how this is just clearly not correct whatsoever. But if we paint onto it, we can get it to face the way that we want it to. Which is going to happen a lot when you're baking things. It's all based on the way that our normals are set up. So before, what you'd have to do is change where your edges are hard, maybe add some supporting edges there. Obviously, like that adds additional polygons, and you're going to have to change things like your UVs. You're going to have to change your actual geometry. You don't want to do that. That's why I opt to always bake my meshes inside of Toolbag, because even things that don't seem like they're skewed like this, like have some skewing to them. And then this is just going to ensure that we get good bakes. Right here as well is a really good example of like, since this is like such a big face, and this is like a soft edge here, and this is a hard edge here, like things aren't going to be averaged out properly. Our normals are going to be sticking out in all these weird directions, as you can see. So we can bring it into Toolbag and just automatically or not automatically, but really quickly fix that. So now everything's fine and perfect. And pretty much, like, if we look at this now and compare it to our actual high poly, like, they're pretty much the exact same, even though we're saving a ton of geometry here. So what we can now do is go to our Baker, choose the maps that we want. I'm also going to just make this, now we'll make it 2K. There's no point in making it 4K for this. Samples, we can bring that up. Let's see, for our presets, configure, yeah, we're going to change our map. So we want normal object space, we want position, curvature, and thickness, we want ambient occlusion, material ID, and that should be it. And these are the maps we're baking, because these are the maps that we're going to be using inside of Substance Painter to sort of make this as good as it can be. So I'm going to hit done. Make sure they are all selected here. This is a bit of a case-by-case basis. It depends on how you're using your normals based on DirectX or OpenGL, which we'll get into a bit more. But you might have to go into here to normals and flip your Y. I'm not going to do that right now. We're going to see if it works or not when we bring it into Substance Painter. But for now, I'm just going to hit bake. It's going to be making all those maps. And since we set our folder, as you can see here, to the desktop, they're all just going to be spat out there. So some maps take a lot longer than others to make. I believe it is thickness and ambient occlusion that take the longest. Things like normal and ID take no time at all. So we're already done, which is really, really quick, but that's because we're also using not that many meshes and at a 2K resolution. Once we get to the end of the typewriter, you'll see it'll take a lot longer to bake, but we can now, as you can see, yeah, there's all of our stuff. What we can do now is go into Substance Painter, and yeah, we can set this up, and then we're pretty much done. Like, I don't think I need to go over a tutorial on how to render this. There really is no point. I don't know if I can make, you know, a shape that looks like this look too pretty anyways, like it's just a hunk of metal. But yeah, for the sake of this, we're just going to stop it at the texturing part, and then hopefully you guys have a excuse me, hopefully you guys have a pretty good example of sort of how we're going to be moving forward with a lot of this stuff. And then, like I said, in the next video, what I'm going to be doing is teaching you guys how to set up all the tools that I was just using. And once all that's synced up, we should be good to go to sort of dive into the blockout phase, which is always super fun because we really don't have to worry too much about geometry. We don't have to worry too much about our poly count or how anything looks. Well, we do have to worry about how things look, but like not at a very stressful level or anything like that. Like, it's just making things function. So once this opens, I'll show you how to set everything up, and then we can just sort of move on with all that stuff. So I do not want to install a new version. I guess I need to update my license. Okay. Cool. So that was really quick. Okay, so this is going to take a second to sort of have everything pop up. Got quite a few custom smart materials and stuff like that in here. So I will be back with you guys as soon as this is ready and updated. Okay, so it seems like we're good to go here. I'm just going to go to File, New, and wait for this to pop up. Not responding. Interesting. Substance Painter is definitely a bit of a heavy program when it comes to its demands, but essentially all we have to do is select, for this first one, just our metal low, and then we're going to be adding in all of our meshes here, or not meshes, our maps. Open those up, hit OK, and this is where we're going to find out if our normal maps are facing the right way or not. If not, there's two really quick ways to fix that, which I'll be showing you guys. But yeah, so everything's loaded up really, really quickly, which is nice. This is just my default layout. Yours might look a little bit different, but just everything should be more or less in the same spot. But if we scroll up here under our shelf and go to project, these are all the meshes that we loaded in, which is really nice. And they're going to be saving to our actual project file. So we can start slotting things in. So these are our actual maps here. So I'm going to put normal into normal first. So yeah, it's inverted right now, as you can tell by the edges. So let's quickly fix that. The two ways we can fix that is just by rebaking in here and just changing this to flip Y. Or we can open it in Photoshop and just invert the Y channel. For the sake of this, it'll probably be a lot faster to do it this way. So I'm just going to hit bake. So now it looks inverted here. But if we reload this and slot it back in, it's fine. The reason that is because if we go to our project configuration, we're using DirectX, but Marmoset is baking for like an OpenGL build by default. So just make sure that things are set up. So just really quickly and an easy way to check that. So with that set up properly, we can then put in our ambient occlusion just by slotting these into the right place. What is this one? This is curvature. Material ID. This is, we don't need to use this one actually. Position. So what this is a world space normal map. We already have a tangent space normal map, so we don't really need both. And then this should be thickness, which is great. So with these selected and all set up, we can be well on our way to making things. So let me show you the material ID and how that sort of works. So I'm just going to go to the smart materials. And we're just going to be slapping on smart materials for the sake of this and just get a really quick, like dirty example of how this works. I'm just going to put on brass. And as you can see, it's going to cover everything, right? Like the whole thing is covered in brass. But if I right click here and do add a mask with color selection and pick color, as you can see where we set up the different colors for our bolts, they're popping up here. And I can just click this blue. And now even though there's no geometry to select, these bolts are a different color. And this is super useful anytime you're doing a high poly to low poly workflow. This is pretty much a must. And then we can turn our tolerance up and down. What this is doing is the edges here, like how strong do we want it to be picking that color. Obviously, we can change the hardness as well. You're going to want to finick with this a little bit. But if you're doing bolts or anything, I would turn it up pretty high. You'll notice if you have a bunch of colors that are similar and you change the tolerance, it'll start popping into other colors. So if we had like a green, for example, it might start popping up in where we ID'd our green. Just something to keep in mind. That's why I like to keep these smaller pieces like higher up in the layers and keep the tolerance lower so that we can then, let's use like an antique silver, we put it underneath. That looks really bad. Let's not use that. Like this bronze or something. Yep, sure, that no, that's not good. I mean, I guess it really does not matter that much, but iron old. There we go. There we go. Yeah, that's pretty good. So as you can see, even though the mask might not be like super perfect because we can change the tolerance, as long as there's something underneath of it, it should be fine. It is better practice though to add mask with color selection and pick this and put it underneath and make sure it's matching. Just because the height information of this underneath of a different material might affect it a little bit, but essentially that's how we can get our different materials working. But yeah, that's more or less how we can get a nice beveled edge, get like our nice mesh from Maya into ZBrush, get a nice beveled edge, bring it back, bake it down, and get it into Painter and just sort of have that all set up really quickly. That's more or less like the whole workflow we're going to be doing, but on a much larger scale. Obviously, there's going to be new techniques and more complications thrown into the mix when we are doing things with the typewriter. If I can just bring that back up. So yeah, if we start looking at this, like there's a lot more going on here. Like once we get to texturing with some things like this, like where do we stack our UVs, where do we don't, how do we bake when we stack UVs, what are some more techniques in ZBrush to get better bevels, how do we boolean for certain things like these bolts, like all of that is going to be explained. But yeah, overall though, this is the workflow, and hopefully After watching this, you guys have a better understanding of some of the terminology and the setup that I'm going to be doing moving forward. So yeah, that should conclude essentially our introduction. Hopefully you guys are on the same page now. What I wanted to do to set this whole thing up is have this first chapter sort of be, what are the goals for this? What can you get out of this, and how are we going to be doing this? So hopefully that clears a lot of stuff up. I do have my social media links in this package as well. So if you guys want to contact me that way, if you ever have any questions throughout the rest of this, please don't hesitate to contact me. But for now, that should probably do it for the first chapter. So in the second chapter, like I said, we're going to be setting up our plugins, setting up our user interface, and from there we can actually dive in and start working on this thing. So yeah, I will see you guys in chapter 2.